Hello, everyone. You're watching episode 1 of my Road to Las Vegas series, where I show you my entire preparation as I plan to qualify for Road to Las Vegas here in Set 18 Enchanted Wilds. Today, in this episode, we'll be going over my preparation for my 4 cost comps that I'll be trying in PvE. Now, as a disclaimer, it's PvE. Anything can change. Units can have their traits changed. They can have their abilities changed. Nothing is set in stone, but I have built some core ideas around some trait packages, unit packages that I want to try out. And if you're watching this video and you're also trying to make comps in PvE, take these ideas, enhance them as you want, remove things, add things. All of the team builder codes will be in the link in the description on a spreadsheet, so they're easily accessible. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first 4 cost comp that we're going to be looking at is Ahri. We're just going to go left to right from the 4 cost carries here. Now, Ahri is the Blossom Spellweaver, and her ability is this huge Spirit Bomb. It's just a nuke that'll deal damage to the largest group of enemies, not necessarily who she's targeting. It's just this big AoE. So first, let's try to activate her traits. Ahri and Kama are both Blossom Spellweavers, so they'll be the easiest to fit in, and then we'll get in the other 4 cost Blossom, which is Set. Now, Spellweaver as a trait is nothing new. Their team gets AP, but also Spellweavers gain more AP whenever other Spellweavers cast. So the more Spellweavers you have, the more AP the whole group of Spellweavers are getting. So my idea was to play around multiple Spellweavers. Fiddlesticks and Cassiopeia are both low-cost Spellweavers that we can fit in. And then we activate Fiddlesticks with Defender, which is Lilia. And then we activate Set with a Brawler. Again, this is a 4 cost comp, which is where typically means we're rolling on level 8. So we're going in with the assumption that we haven't hit any legendaries. So let's just throw in an Alistar or maybe a Krug. A Krug is probably better. And then we have a +1 here who's going to be Rakan. So the idea is here, Cassiopeia, Karma, and Fiddlesticks have relatively low mana bars, so they're going to be constantly casting while Ahri builds up to her large big cast. In terms of items, Ahri is for sure going to want at least 1 tier item, preferably double mana cast, whether that's Shojin Nasher, Shojin Adaptive, Blue White Adaptive, at least 1 tier item, and then some sort of damage amp item, whether that's JG or Rabadon's. I feel that she's for sure going to have Abyss, but uh, her items are going to be flexible as long as we're amping that big cast whenever she casts. So we also have Cassiopeia here, who's going to be our utility slot. Now her ability is interesting as she will slowly infect the entire board with her poison, so it makes her a great static Shiv and Morello holder. And then we have this whole package. Set and Lilia are our 2 4 cost tanks. Lilia has her sleep, making her kind of a CC tank, but she's also a sustain tank with Fae. And then she also will amplify all of our magic damage on the board when the enemies wake up. And then Set is just our beefy brawler tank who will just soak up damage. So the question with these 4 cost comps are how do we get there, and then how do we cap the board? So capping the board is pretty straightforward. Cassiopeia will come out for a Loon. And then our +1 in the end is a couple things. It could be Diana to activate Lunar and Vanguard, or just either one of Maokai or Tarek. I think preferably you'd either play Diana or Maokai as they're both scaling. Tarek is interesting. He activates Vanguard for Rakan, but it's kind of a selfish trait. Nothing really buffing the board. So with that said, you probably want to prefer Diana or Maokai. So how do we get to this board? Typically, we'll play this from a Blossom Open with these 3, and then a Rakan as our connecting unit into our late game board. This board doesn't have that much board strength in the early game, so I can see AP Ahri kind of being a loose streak. Because we also have Blossom. Now, Blossom is interesting because it interacts with the set mechanic, and it'll upgrade our Wisps at 3 Blossom, meaning that a lot of the econ neutral Wisps can be econ positive. which makes this kind of viable as a loose streak AP option. We'll be picking up AP wisps along the way, and then we can spike really hard in 4-2 with Ahri. So next, let's move on to the next AP 4-cost carry, which is Aphelios. Aphelios is interesting because he's lunar and rapid fire. And it's kind of a question of do you even want to activate lunar if you're playing Aphelios primary, because it gives attack speed, which he already has innate built in, and AP, which he doesn't really need because he's an 80 carry. But there is a combination of units that kind of fill out these conditions. So let's put them on the board. We're going to play Aphelios and Brambleback dual carry. We'll fill in Sentinel as our Rift Beast Vanguard tank, Diana for Ravager Vanguard, and Lunar. And then we have Raptor. Raptor will finish our Rift Beast and give us our second rapid fire. So this is kind of the core package we have here with Aphelios and Brambleback. Brambleback and Aphelios are both 80 units, so they'll synergize with each other. Brambleback ignores armor, which is active, so Shred isn't entirely necessary, or Sunder, sorry, but I feel like you'll still want to build it with Aphelios, which we'll get into that later. And then filling out the rest of the package, we'll have Varus, Amumu, and Yorick. So we're playing 3 rapid fire. We're playing Amumu and Varus, which is going to be providing us burn for the team, and then Yorick as activating Juggernaut and Summoner for our Amumu and Raptor. So kind of the idea with this comp is we'll be building Aphelios as a Ginsu Kraken DB kind of guy. There's actually a question of if Ginsu is even necessary because he has 3 rapid fire. But for the time being, we'll be building Ginsu. This could even be Giant Slayer. It's really open to what item components you have. And then Brambleback, he kind of takes leftover 80 items, leftover fighter items, something like QSS, Titans, BT, maybe even Edge of Night QSS, Sterix even. There's a lot of stuff that can play in Brambleback. This is kind of like it's very similar to the idea of Master Yi Kindred, where Brambleback with his passive where he leaps, he plays this sort of disruptor role that gives time for Aphelios to ramp up in the back. And then we have Ancient Sentinel, who's kind of the new of this set, knocking up and mana reaving. We have Amumu also giving frontline stuns. And then we have Diana and Raptor kind of as like a cleanup for a secondary AD or secondary damage sources. So this package kind of works well. It doesn't cap too high because in order to cap this board, we'd have to kind of play into a Loon or some sort of 5-cost 80 carry. Maybe Draven goes in, but typically if you're angling for a 4-cost 80, you're kind of angling for just a strong stage 4 stabilization, and then maybe you'll start to get capped by AP boards in stage 5. So in my mind, this is very solid. How we would play this is we have a rapid fire open. We have Varus and Xayah. Xayah is the most similar in terms of damage profile and ability shape to Aphelios. So Xayah is definitely supposed to be the Aphelios item holder. And then from here, it's kind of flexible. Picking up Yorick and Rakan is great because we're holding Yorick for the late game. But really anything, it could be an Elderwood opener. We can play. This is great because it gives us kind of tempo with the summon. There's actually a second summon here, and then it gives us Inferno. This is a really strong open. It's a little awkward because we're not holding Yorick on the board, but for sure this is something we could play. But really, any combination of frontline, backline with these rapid fires is playable. So that covers Aphelios and Brambleback. So let's move on to Ezreal. Ezreal is very interesting in my mind because there's a couple of different ways you can play Ezreal. I think the most obvious way is to play Vertical Elderwood, which would look something like this. Maybe not Xayah, and then something like this, and then maybe like a Set or like a Brambleback. This is for sure playable, but it's very low cap. If you can get the 7 Elderwood with Gnar, maybe like an Elderwood Lux, it's definitely something to go for. But I think what's more plausible and more realistic in terms of playing for a strong level 8 board is playing around Ezreal and Soraka. So Ezreal, Soraka would go on the board, and then we have Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw is a really interesting trait because he provides Shred and Sunder, which is kind of enables these two. And then we'd play this, which is Invoker, and then we'd play this. We'd play Alistar, we played Krug, and we play Hecarim. And then we just need Grump. And then we have these two. These are our Elderwood summons, in case you were confused. So, in my mind, this idea around Ezreal Soraka dual carry makes a lot of sense. They're both low mana cost units, so they're both constantly pumping out damage onto the board. We have Ancient Sentinel. We'd probably put the Rift Beast mark on Ancient Sentinel, so he's giving our team more mana, which is more casts for Soraka and Ezreal. We have Shred and Sunder already built in. We have a very solid front line with our Vanguards and Brawlers, which synergize with each other. And then we have scaling with our Elderwood. We can always play into like Gnar or Elderwood Lux or something like that. You can even think about playing Kennen for the 3 Executioner. So again, the question is, how do we get to a board like this? It isn't exactly clear from your opener. However, I think if you play around the adapters early, Akali and Gromp, because they can be both either AD or AP. So you're going to be slamming any items that you can, AD or AP items that can fit either Soraka or Ezreal. And then just playing from here. You can play like a Rift Beast open. You can play around Krug if we can get there. Krug and like Alistar. I think these adapters are going to be very flexible in the early game and very easy to tempo with, especially if you have a lot of items. And then in terms of itemization for Ezreal and Soraka themselves, they already have crit built in, so they don't need something like JG. So for Ezreal, something like Last Whisper, DB, maybe even a blue buff or a red buff, something very similar to like set 10 Ezreal. And then Soraka, she'll want Nashers for sure, maybe even double Nashers, but again, it's dependent on your item economy. Guard Breaker, something that will really give her a lot of crits and chance to crit. That's Ezreal Soraka. So moving on, the frontline tanks we aren't really covering individually, but they'll for sure be shown in a lot of these comps later on. Right, moving on to Morgana. Morgana is very interesting because I think she has one of the highest cap potentials out of the 4 cost carries. And her board will look something like this. We have Morgana and Ancient Sentinel connecting. We're going to play another Invoker with Pebbles. We're going to play a Lilia and Fiddlesticks, who will synergize with Defender. We'll play a Scuttlecrab to activate a Rift Beast trait. And then we have Rakan again. I think Rakan is a very high value unit. He just connects so many late game 5 costs and 4 costs. And then we have in our last slot will be a Spellweaver. It's going to be Cassiopeia. This comp I think is pretty stable on level 8. But I think where the more interesting part comes in is you can actually play Coven in stage 4. So let's get some of the Coven units out on there. I think we'll take out the Rift Beast. We'll take out Pebbles. We'll play something like this, Elise, and maybe Caitlyn. So Coven works a little differently from Anima of set 17. It doesn't care about your lose streak, which means I think it'll scale heavily with stage, meaning the later you play Coven, the more Coven stacks you'll get. So let's say we load into stage 4, we are 80 plus HP, and we have an idea we want to play loosely around AP. If we can play around 4 Coven or maybe even 5 Coven, if we start getting those Coven stacks, then we can go straight to 9, fast 9. And that fast 9 board will look something like this. We have Alune, we have Diana, we have Pebbles back on the board, and then we have this, and then maybe like a Maokai. Right, so the idea with the board like this is Morgana applies, with her ability, she applies a curse, and the curse can stack. So the more curses on the board, the more damage, everyone's taking more damage. And then we have Lilia and Fiddlesticks, who are going to be constantly debuffing the team. Fiddlesticks will have a flat shred, and then Lilia, similar to the Ahri board, she'll apply a sleep, and then enemies who take damage will be woken up and they'll take additional max health damage. And then we have Sentinel. Sentinel is constantly with Invoker and Blue buff will be casting at least once, hopefully twice. So each time he casts, each allies gain mana regen, and Invokers gain more mana regen. And it's this loop of Morgana will cast at the start of the fight, debuffs will be applied, Invokers will be casting, giving more debuffs and more curses, and then the capped board will play around Alune. Alune will be casting her spell with Attuned, eventually getting to that big moon crash, which will just hopefully wipe the board. I think this comp has a lot of potential. The items themselves are pretty flexible. I think Morgana will do really well with Adaptive Helm, because she'll just gain more mana from all the sources of mana that's happening in the game from this comp. And then just damage amp, maybe something like a Gunblade or a Deathblade. Not a Deathblade, sorry, a Death Cap and a Gunblade, because her curse is constantly ticking damage on the enemy team. Gunblade is something that I think could be really good on Morgana because she'll just be constantly keeping the front line alive. And then how do we get to this board? Well, it's pretty straightforward. We have Invokers, and then we play around. Maybe it's just Yorick Rakan again, or it's some brawler setup. Again, just a balance of frontline and backline. Pebbles and Teemo are going to be great item carriers for our late game AP carries. And then when we get to Cassiopeia, she'll be a great holder of stuff like Void Staff and Morello. Right, moving on to Nidalee. Nidalee is a very interesting unit because she's a primal and adapter, meaning that she can be either AD or AP. However, I think if we're going to play Nidalee primary, then I think she's going to be stronger as an AP carry, simply because she has that ability to really ramp up with her attack speed. It's very similar to a LeBlanc of set 17. She'll love stuff like Ginsu's, Rabadon's, Gunblade, really just anything that'll give her a lot of scaling into the fight. So first, let's activate her primal trait with Vi, and then the idea here is just to build a front line. So let's get some Juggernauts on the board. Let's get 4 Juggernaut on the board, something like this. Actually, I think it's supposed to be Rakan. And then we get Sentinel. And then we try to fill out the rest of the back line. So let's get a Rift Beast up there, Rift Beast with Gromp, and then Invoker with Morgana. So the idea here is we have our scaling damage with Nidalee. Morgana can be a great applier for things such as Static Shiv and Morello. Sorry, that should go there. And then we also have late game potential. Amumu is a kind of our +1 Juggernaut. He can come in for Maokai. And then this is kind of the board that we have. Our level 9 is pretty flexible. We can play something like Ivern, or maybe just another Invoker or Adapter. There's a lot of potential in this board to really scale as long as we can get a good front line, a really strong front line, and then Nidalee Morgana in the back, just slowly whittling down the team for that scaling win. Okay, how do we get there? That is a great question. Again, something about these adapters is that they're very flexible. I think Gromp could be a very solid item holder for Nidalee. His AP version is just always trying to cast, so Ginsu's is honestly fine. Maybe even a Shojin who can later go on to Morgana. And then we'll play around these Juggernauts. So something like this, maybe a 4 Juggernaut and then Adapter. Something like this on your level 6, maybe a Rift Beast to activate Scuttle Crab. Scuttle Crab is a great early tank. I think his ability will make him extremely durable as even a solo frontline tank, just because he has that aggro drop and then durability. I think percent durability in the early game is especially strong, especially with green buff. It's just kind of like a second win for the team, which is going to be great. I think this is a very solid AP comp if you have kind of a Ginsu AP opener. All right, let's move on to Sivir. Sivir is a primal hunter unit. So her ability, Boomerang Blade, She throws it, it bounces to different enemies and deals damage. And then she also has this innate passive where when it kills an enemy, it'll bounce an additional time. So she really wants to deal damage from her ability. So she's an AD caster unit, meaning she'll like stuff like Shojin and IE. So how do we build this board around her? Let's get Vi in there to activate her primal buff. And then let's get Yorick for a Juggernaut. Let's get Lilia and Rammus for Defender. And then let's get Tristana for Sivir to activate her Hunter and give Lilia Fae. And then let's get a Spraykin unit. It's going to be Kabuko. And then a Brawler, which is going to be Set. So the idea with this comp is that Sivir and Tristana have innate synergy with each other. Tristana will throw an explosive charge, and then if the enemy that has the charge on it dies, it'll attach to a different enemy. So they have this synergy where they both want to kill their target as fast as possible so that their ability will bounce to another unit. And then we have Set and Lilia, kind of a similar idea from previous comps. Set is this big beefy tank, and then Lilia is our CC tank. We have Spraykin with Rammus, Tristana, and Kabuko, which Spraykin will activate our BFF, which is going to be Willump. Or Nunu and Willump. I don't know which one. I don't know who it is. We don't exactly know how this unit will work. It's supposed to roll around the battlefield, I think, and then provide a buff to the team. However, we don't exactly know what that buff is. But if it's something useful, then it's just another form of disruption for the team. And then this comp caps out pretty easily. The idea is to play around Ashe and Gnar over Kabuko. And then we have Ashe, who's firing the Spirit Rift. It's this huge cast that tears through the entire board. If this ability is enough to finish off whoever Sivir and Tristana are attacking, then just more chances for their abilities to bounce to additional units. So how do we get to this board? Well, Hunter does have a couple early game units in Cinderling and Caitlyn. And then we're going to want to play again around these Juggernaut units, maybe Scuttle Crab, and then we can activate Rift Beast, something like this. Again, as we talked about in the Nidalee comp, Scuttle Crab is a very good unit early, I predict. He's going to be very strong, giving our Hunters enough time to ramp up. Hunters have a unique trait where if they haven't swapped targets for X seconds, they gain damage amp. So the longer they hit a unit, the more damage amp they'll get, which is very good. So something like this, again, openers are not set in stone. Try to be flexible, play around the strength of your board, try to have an equal balance of frontline and backline. Okay, moving on to our last 4-cost carry that we're going to cover today, and that's going to be Soraka. Soraka, I believe, will have, again, one of the most potentials to cap, especially because she has a late game executioner in Kennen. So let's build this level 8 comp. Soraka, let's activate her trait with Azir Executioner, and then let's activate Azir's trait with Malphite. And then let's go back to Soraka. Let's activate Flora Fatalis, our 2 traits. Let's get these 2 in, Shen and Fiddlesticks for Defender. Let's get Yorick, who's a Juggernaut and Summoner. And then our last slot here on level 8 can be a few things. I think in most case scenarios it's going to be Zyra. Zyra will give us 3 Summoner and then also provide us with damage resistance, more when her plants are alive. And then this comp will cap out very easily with Kennen on level 9. So the idea with this comp is you play from an AP crit open. You want a lot of crit items on Soraka so that she'll, every time she casts her star, they'll be doing max damage. We have Kennen, who will be providing our secondary damage in the late game, just blowing up the entire board if there's enough burn. And then we have Fiddlesticks providing our flat magic resistance shred. We have a Mumu and Shen as our frontline Infernos, providing anti-heal to the board. And then we have Malphite and Yorick, who are our secondary tanks. Malphite kind of being a tank in himself. He has a built-in Gargoyle's Tome Plate thanks to Monolith. And then this is a pretty straightforward high cap AP board. I mean, just look at these traits. They look amazing. And yeah, there's Soraka. There is a secondary variation of Soraka that I think is even higher cap, believe it or not. And it's to play around Kha'Zix. So Kha'Zix, what does he do? It doesn't say it right away in Tactic Stock Tools, but it has been revealed that his rival trait, this is specific to Kha'Zix, not to Rengar, um, every 10 takedowns, he has the ability to unlock an additional trait for himself, which will apply to the board. And I believe these traits are Spellweaver, Ravager, Executioner, and Rapid Fire. So something interesting we could do with Soraka is if you recall what we talked about, there is an additional +1 slot on this board, which is this. And then we have Soraka, Azir, and then Yorick. So this is 7 units. If we get something like an early Kha'Zix, and we can the ability to start stacking these takedowns on Kha'Zix early and the ability to unlock his traits, there's a lot of potential to do a lot of cool things here. As you can see, we have 1 on 2 Spellweaver. We can do +1 Spellweaver, +1 Executioner. And then in our late game board with Kennen, we would have 2 Floor Fatalis, 4 Executioner, 3 Inferno, and then Spellweaver, just a team-wide buff, giving our entire team AP, which is great because all of our damage is AP. So something to think about if you end up hitting an early Kha'Zix. He is also kind of a pseudo item carrier for Kha'Zix, for Kennen. So this is a very interesting variation that I think has a lot of potential to be one of the highest cap boards in the game. So if you enjoyed this video and enjoyed hearing about all of the different 4-cost comps that I will be trying, then please leave a like and subscribe. It will show a lot of support for this journey and for what I'm trying to do. Again, all of these comps will be listed in the description below with the Tactic Stock Tools Team Builders link for you to take with you, experiment, enhance, add, remove things. Again, this is PBE, anything could change, but it's always better to go in with some ideas that you want to work with and go from there. So again, this has been Alexi. If you enjoyed this video, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.